First book, Rosie. Rosie is a little girl. She's 5 or 6 or 7. I think she's 4 when her father dies, Andrew Ferguson. And he dies drunk in a car crash, but we don't have a sense of him as an alcoholic. But he drinks too much too often. If you don't know if you're an alcoholic, here's the question. Do you drink too much too often? Do you wish you drank less and you can't seem to get that to happen? So he's an alcoholic. Elizabeth, his wife, is an alcoholic. Fabulous, tall and buxom and dark, but depressed with depression. And the first book is about really surviving an unsurvivable loss, because back to that earlier question, that's what we do here, is that we learn somehow with the love of our funny little galaxy, our motley little crew, to survive unsurvivable loss, and for it to be transformative, for it to give us, in fact, life, for it to bless us when it seemed, in fact, the end of the world. The second book is Crooked Little Heart. That's Rosie at 13 and 14. Because I had played competitive tennis for 9 years in Northern California, and the pressure just killed me. I mean, I was a shy, tiny, sensitive little girl, and I ended up this one year, my 13th year, I cheated in tournaments. When we would get sent to matches that weren't at the club, I would call balls that people hit that were in, out, and I wanted to write about the effects of this pressure on our kids, because I was seeing it in Sam's roommates, that this thing was taking hold and we're in, of exceptionalism. And I was watching these parents try to breed the exceptional children. And I wanted not to do that to Sam. I think it's very tempting to do it. It's a very dark and scary world, and if you have a fantastic education, you can hit the ground running at 22. The idea, the lie, I think it's a great palace lie, is that then you will be found and semi-okay. And so the competition, the jostle, the elbowing is ferocious. So I wrote about the dark shadow of what it does to our kids, and I wrote about Elizabeth in the same kind of position of coming out of the deep, having lost her husband, not knowing what to do, having had the drinks, having had a lot of men, having tried to do a good job by this precious, amazing little girl, brilliant little girl, and having not gotten around to grieving the grief. And she finally gets around to it. She has what I would call a breakdown, although others might call it a breakthrough. Looks bad, and it takes a long time to come back. She's married this scrappy little writer by then named James. And this new book is what I started to talk about earlier, about the girls in this small town who have found a way into the guy's heart and have found a way to feeling valued and feeling powerful. And they think it's fun. And some of them, I interviewed girls extensively, because I know what it's like to be an alcoholic girl. And I was one, but I don't know what it's like to be a telecommunications kiosk. These kids are so plugged in, and they're not only plugged into 80 different forms of communication, they're addicted to hearing from each other every minute, or they start to feel withdrawal, and they have access to all the information that some of you are my age, we may have smoked a lot of dope or done acid or done whatever we did, but we didn't have a clue what any of it meant, and these kids know how to bust any drug test they take. Rosie with 2 drops of bleach can neutralize the THC in a urine test for marijuana. They are on to it. They're like little CIA agents. And so Rosie at 17 is doing all that behavior, and Elizabeth has had a couple slips with alcohol. James adores her. James is much shorter, and he's a writer, which is to say he's wounded and narcissistic and self-obsessed, and he just loves her. I mean, it's a really good marriage. I think one of the things I've done is to capture a really good marriage. There's the old feeling, I think, from the generation before me, that a good marriage was where both people think they got the good deal. And that's the kind of marriage this is. And what are the effects of that when there's as big a secret as Rosie's keeping in the house? What are the effects of a family when the lie machine has been turned on, and when the mother needs to be friends with the daughter and is desperate to be friends with her daughter? The mother does not want to create waves. She wants James to feel very happily married. What is the cost? And can a marriage survive? And so for most alcoholics, we've heard and we know that not one single person on earth has ever gotten another alcoholic sober. We all hope you will be the first one if you are currently trying to do that. But it hasn't happened yet. And that makes sense. when the alcoholic you're trying to sober up is a grown-up. Because you understand that people get to make their own decision. You have one precious life, and you really get to have your own emotional anchor. What do you do if it's a 14-year-old? What if you do it with a 17-year-old? You can't let them hit bottom. They're driving drunk. What do you do? So that's what this book is about. I'm going to read 3 paragraphs. They're going to be all the way, no, it's going to be a tiny bit more, but not by much. Okay, I'll read you the first page, chapter 1. There are so many evils that pull on our children. Everyone in the mellow town of Lansdale, where it's easy to see only beauty and decency, a teenager died nearly every year after a party, and kids routinely went from high school to psych wards, halfway houses, or jail. Once a year, a child from the county of Marin jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. Elizabeth Ferguson looked around at the Saturday morning comings and goings of townspeople and saw parents who had lost or were losing their kids, kids who had lost or were losing their minds. She and James sat with their coffees and newspaper on the wide steps of the parquet, which was what everyone in town called the parking bay in the center of town, making it seem a lot more festive than it was. It was a big parking lot that abutted the boulevard that ran from San Quentin to the east all the way out to Olima on the Pacific coast. There was a kiosk. Wait, I kind of got a little tiny bit lost. There's a kiosk at one side where they're sitting right now, where there's a sense of commercialism and transaction. It's just where the teenagers are hanging out. And there you can tell a lot is going down. I skipped a page. That's what happened. There's a bus kiosk on the north side where she and James sat today waiting for her daughter, whom they were going to take shopping in town if she ever arrived. Rosie needed notebooks and some summer tops for her last weeks as a junior at the local high school, and shops fanned out below the parkade, stretching almost to the northern face of Mount Tamalpais, but Rosie was nowhere in sight. Elizabeth felt large and worried. Even sitting down, she was taller than her husband, and her otherwise dark, thick hair was slightly more gray-streaked. But Rosie was taller than either, almost 5'11", black-haired, strapping, and fabulous, except when they wanted to disown her, like now. Some of the young men converging at the kiosk had cultivated the look of homelessness, but without the inconvenience and hardship. Car keys dangled from their belts as they drank $4 lattes. Some looked like star athletes because they were or had been, but you saw a feral, dark energy in some of the young here, of despair, blankness, failure, and indirect gazes, ill health, or sometimes a dangerous, raw male potency. The grunge and the piercings, the clothes that deliberately didn't fit, that said, I am the best, I am the worst, and the tattoos that were psychic band-aids to cover the wounds. So now there's, I'll just read this a little bit more. Now there's Elizabeth and James, who are married, and then Elizabeth's best friend is Ray, who's always Zoptic and always religious. In the last book, she's not using the phrase of the Lord yet, but everybody has gotten very tense thinking she's about to. She has married Lank, who is James's best friend, so there's 2 couples that really spend a lot of time together. All 4 of them had problems now in areas where they hardly used to have areas. They both wore glasses. They all wore glasses. James had had 2 skin cancers removed from his widening bald spot. Elizabeth had a hammer toe and ensuing gigantic corns, which always grew back after removal. James's best friend, Lank, had a bad rotator cuff. Ray, his wife, and Elizabeth's best friend, was getting carpal tunnel syndrome from the years at her loom, and both women leaked if they laughed or coughed too hard. Everyone's back ached except Rosie's. Lank had such terrible vision now that no one would drive with him at night, even though he wore glasses which magnified his already big brown eyes to the size of a rainforest mammal. Lank teaches school in Petaluma, which is 45 minutes north of Marin, where I live. This little hippie town, they say, is our town, Fairfax, as they say, is Mayberry on acid. So Lank teaches in Petaluma, which you probably know used to be the chicken capital of the world. It's on the mighty Petaluma River, father of all waters. And he teaches up there. Lank, who taught high school in Petaluma, had responded to Elizabeth's periodic misery by inventing a church just for her. It was called Seeing the Light Ministries. Not long ago, during an awful patch between Elizabeth and Rosie, Blank had, in his capacity as pastor, reminded Elizabeth of the doctrine against raising your kids as if they were precious equals. This seemed to be the current national parenting trend, but it was utterly misguided. You are the sun, he told Elizabeth over the phone. The sun, Elizabeth. The child is merely a moon. A moon. She has no light of her own, no income, no car. She's a satellite. Her judgment is frequently poor, and she is mean. She is South Africa before the revolution. Cruel and crazy. Divest, Elizabeth, divest. Okay, I just want Rosie to appear. It's about 4 sentences. They wait for half hour. It's not like they're going to take her in for oral surgery, right? They want to take her shopping, and she makes them wait, because all teenagers, most of them are passive-aggressive, and I no longer believe that aggression is passive. I think it's a hyphenated disease for a reason. I think it's aggression. But finally, so James and Elizabeth get up to leave. And there she was, calling for him, smiling, waving, walking toward them, tall and broad-shouldered, after a childhood of being so thin, her black hair piled on her head the way Ray wore hers, like hippie girls, secured with pencils, silver clasp, porcelain. Her breasts were nearly as big as Elizabeth's now. Everyone, men and women alike, checked them out. Even children checked them out with memory and fear and desperation. So she and James get into it. James says, I hate waiting. And Rosie says, oh, well, the next time, James, why don't you just leave? In that tone specific to them. And James says, I think I will. And then Elizabeth, the trigger is thrown, and she wants to fix and save and rescue and smooth over. And then she gets into, has Rosie eaten, and shouldn't we get him out? I'm sure that's not familiar. Have you eaten? Did you get a good sleep? Is that concealer under your eyes? I didn't actually hear you. Come in, honey. God, stop, says Rosie. I'm not a child. So James starts to say something, and Rosie made a face of exasperation and reached forward with a burlesque flourish to choke him, and in spite of himself, he smiled. He ambushed her with a wrestling move, his famous ninja tango hammerlock. She easily slipped out of his grasp. Each of them knew all the other's moves. He leered at her, and she countered with a karate chop to his neck. He took 3 steps back and went into the one yoga pose he knew, downward-facing dog. Elizabeth and Rosie exchanged a look. He was such an idiot. When he got up, the 3 of them set off together down the street. So that's the book. They all think they know each other's moves. And if they did, we don't have a novel. Thank you. I love being here.